Hey, so this video I'm gonna talk a bit about like my ideas around music in relation to solar punk. Um, for me, as someone who's like I'm a singer songwriter, I love listening to music, love creating music, love to sing, love to dance, all of that. Um, for me, music is a very important aspect of my life, and I feel that there's a lot of entertainment that you get from that, but also like mental health wise, it just helps a lot. And even if you're not a person who's like into creating or stuff like that, just listening to music is a very therapeutic thing. It's a very healing thing, and it gets you through like a lot of stuff. So with that being said, I find it to be very interesting and um, yeah, important to look at like what role does music play in a space, a solar punk space. So that is what I'm going to talk about today, and yeah, two things like first, this is just me riffing about. I've been thinking about this for some time, but I haven't written anything down. So this is just me riffing about, and then also I want to like really, at a future time, um, develop my ideas further. I think write it down actually, and then really make like a script around it to like actually like present it. So this is mostly like an introductionary video to my ideas surrounding like music and what I found I am drawn to in exploring like what that um, would sound like in a solar punk story, solar punk narrative. Like, what is the solar punk music genre? And I guess I will start with that. I think just like the solar punk um, genre itself, it's a very like meta genre, meaning that it can encompass like a lot of like different genres inside of it, and it can pertain like different types of stories and ways of storytelling, where the only main run through is that it has to relate to the intersections of um, environmental solar energy, which is positive, hopeful, and then also incorporates like intersectional feminist ideas, and also like decentralizing the West and whiteness as like the default. So and also inherently queer then, therefore, at least from my perspective. As a queer person, I think that for me, like last week, I when I mentioned that I wanted um, to do this series, I uh, initially was thinking like, okay, so what am I actually going to talk about when it relates to music? But like last night, I laid in bed thinking about it, and what struck me was that my own personal like music journey, the things that I'm drawn to, hold a perfect space in what I Rufino Enriquez would consider like solar punk music, because what it all comes down to is that it's a very like a personal thing, and I think that the multitude of like ways you can create solar punk narratives like around which peoples and which spaces and whatever have you, the same applies to the music, where um it's very diverse, and it can also be like in the way that I like the style of solar punk visually to not be as like as stale or um, as as clean cut, but a bit more messy and a bit more dynamic. I feel that the same applies to Solarpunk music. It's going to be a very personal thing where different people in a Solarpunk soundtrack, different sounds will be present, and there will all of them will be valid. I think the most important thing is that it has to be an honest music. It has to be not commercialized. It has to be me personally. Really, if you are gonna collaborate, actually like collaborate, not in the same day that the popular music industry now works, where you have like this person added this line, so therefore he gets this percentage of the check, and I guess that like almost 10 people working on a song, which like in one hand, which is why I said like I'm not against collaborating, but I think the mechanical aspect of it, we should throw away. It should really be about the actual individuals participating in the project, in the sound of it, in the music creation process. And I feel like um, I'm gonna speak on the surface here as someone who's just like the way I experience this artist's work, but these artists actually, because I'm thinking of multiple artists that I am drawn to, and I it's also like I said, I will revisit this subject as I move along, and then also like in my own personal like music creation process, I wrote some stuff down a couple of years ago, and in between relating to this idea, but I feel like it really applies to my ideas around solarpunk music. The idea of like what Janet Jackson with Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis have accomplished. So I'm specifically talking about the Control, Rhythm Nation, Janet period, the Velvet Rope, um, All for You, and the Unbreakable albums. That whole first of all that era, and then when she came back, she kind of revisited that same process. It's like they are the core three artists who have been collaborating. They know each other. Um, they know the ins and outs of all that there is, and concerning like who they are and what they have to offer and all that. And so their art, um, like those albums, they really like exemplify that dynamic. And like it's always said, like especially dealing with those albums, you can see it as like a journal of Janet's life, but then indirectly also of Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. And the sounds that they experiment with, the themes that they approach, and like every album, Control was more about the self actualization of Janet. Rhythm Nation was more socially conscious, where the self like external should externalize it to like society in general. Then of course Janet with more like the sexual liberation a piece of it, and then and really like take holding space in that. And then because of like the designs of the decade that happened after that, and collaboration with Michael, of course then a reflective period will happen. And so she dealt with her depression and examined that, and looked at like the darker aspects of like all the themes that up until that point she had been approaching with those previous albums. She kind of looked at the darker aspects of that, and really just takes you on a journey. And then what I love about, so because a lot of people, there's like a debate apparently where her the greatness, the great album stopped. So some people said like the Velvet Rope was like the last, aside um from Unbreakable, that the Velvet Rope was like the last one. But for me, like I got, and this is I guess also like a personal this is my personal story, since like the first like full albums of Janet that I had were Designs of a Decade and then All for You. So I have probably a different relation to All for You than maybe a lot of other fans have, because for me it's like the introduction to like a full on Janet album. But even aside from that, I think that it is a nice it gives like a, it ties it up nicely with a nice bow, because All for You is all about her like getting out of the depression and um having like a fun and uplifted moment, where like all the different aspects, of course, of her, all the themes that she generally approaches and all the different sounds are still present in their own way. And I feel like that that whole era from from Control to All for You like really exemplifies like the kind of ideas I have around like what I hope like a solar punk album could be, or not only an album, it's like a solar punk like soundtracks. Um, then also like to not because yeah. So that was like about thematically, lyrically, what it was all about. But there also like the different sounds that each era introduced and played with, where Control was more of like the prototype for the New Jack Swing sound that would become prevalent later in the 80s. Um, because indirectly, she's kind of seems like the Control album is kind of seems like the where it and I don't know, there's a lot of like asterisks and notes and liner notes about this, but like and footnotes, but the there's kind of like this idea that um, Control kind of introduced the general public to that sound. The New Jack Swing sounds like a prototypical experience for that sounds. And then Rhythm Nation, which was more industrial, and then also very much upbeat, very much um, yeah, I'd say just the idea of like thematically hitting um, certain subjects, but then combining them with music that you like to listen to. So you experience like a fun moment or a beat moment, but then there's matter, actual matter that you're receiving while listening to that music. And then with Janet period, you had more of a funky, groovy, and then even house sounds, and the way that mixed together and created like this vibe, which went well with like the perfectly with like the themes and the lyrics of just like your sexuality and all that. Um, and then with the Velvet Rope, like the very like playful sound effects. Um, and keep in mind that throughout all these albums, especially starting with like Rhythm Nation, she approached um, rock, hip hop, R&B, soul, country, and then with Janet, like also like house tracks and then and dance tracks in, and moved it on, and then also pop, just pop in general. And I feel like that not having like a singular sound, but like there's a cohesiveness to it in each album, where it makes total sense. And what I liked about the Velvet Rope was how playful it was, like how randomness sonically it was almost like it felt very true to the introspective piece, because there's like this like revisiting like all your past traumas, and then also just the sounds of just like the randomness of it all. And yeah, I really like that. And then with All For You, it was more back to like the pop sound, like as one of the like the blueprints, like she was the blueprint for a lot of your favorite artists. And that album kind of really like showed people like, oh yeah, this is her house, this is where she lives. um and then with Unbreakable, like the combination of all those albums, I feel like Unbreakable is like really back to form, true to form. And like really looking at like EDM sounds and the way she incorporated that. So this all to say, like I feel like that whole journey of the way that she approached the themes, the lyrics, the sounds, the collaboration process with the three of them are really what I feel my version. So I'm not talking about specifically the sound. I'm talking about the way that you create, the way that you work on a piece. Um, I feel like that kind of exemplifies like how I feel Solarpunk music, um, dare say should be, but at least I would like it to be. Um, and then to add some other artists, like I feel like in that same vein of like those album styles, the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill is like a perfect example of like a similar kind of album where it's cohesive, it's very personal, and just plays with like sounds and like really takes you in, and it's honest, and it's very like it fills you up. um Christina Aguilera had it with Stripped, Back to Basics, and Bionic. And then I would also say like Liberation. I would probably also fall under that same vein. I Although I feel like it's stronger with those three albums, Stripped, Back to Basics, and Bionic, where you play, because what Back to Basics, I feel like Stripped and the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill kind of are like in that same like um space where Control, Janet, Rhythm Nation, All For You, and The Velvet Rope are um housed in. But then like Back to Basics and Bionic, I feel, are, to me, interesting ways of playing with that dynamic, where okay, you have that personal moment. And I feel like um I guess Back to Basics and this is gonna be a very weird comparison, but stick with me here. I feel like Back to Basics and Bionic are closer related to sonically, um, the Velvet Rope, since it played with the artistic, um, so just sonically with a different artistic sound. She took like Christina took like the Stripped album, and then what if I then this is just like very plainly, like simply said, like there's a lot of more layers in the creation process of it, of course. But like the way it comes across to me is like she took her basically her Stripped album and said, what if I created this Stripped album in a different time, but still related to like currently, like, so it's the same journal idea of having, she was just getting married, so there was a lot of love songs, whereas where in Stripped it was more all over the place because she was a young woman just coming into her own. So that was a different time period, versus Back to Basics, where it was more just in a love space. So everything was surrounding that. Like also the creation process of her getting into studios with like red lipsticks and having that era of the 20s, 30s, and 40s in her wardrobe, and just visually also like representing like what she felt about it. And I'm not talking about later on in the promotional tour and the videos and the album covers, but even in like the creation process itself, she was already in that headspace. And and then the reverse, where that she went back, I feel like Back to Basics, or I'm sorry, Bionic was like stepping forward in the future. And I feel like that Similarly, it's like a reimagining of like how you can like approach that. And so to make my point more even more clear, like when I talk about the comparison with Velvet Rope, I'm talking sonically the way that the in the Velvet Rope the team played with like different sounds, and it was not um which is playful. And I feel like you can play with eras and times, and I feel like Back to Basics and Bionic did that. When I think about like other albums, I the Janelle Monáe, like her whole discography, of course, almost is kind of in the same vein. And I think about like 21 Pilots, I feel also kind of like fall into that space where like they're cohesive albums that are especially like I'm mostly familiar with Blurry Face, but Blurry Face is like a pretty good. I think the Electric Lady from Janelle Benet Entered Computer. Um, and then also like that like there are a lot of more albums that we could point to, but like to give you like an idea of like the kind of vibes that I like the idea of concept albums. And I feel like especially when it comes to expressing oneself, staying true to oneself, showing your own diversity and your own like multiplicity, I feel like those types of concept albums where you explore and you treat it like a journal basically, and then explore different sounds and but still are having to be cohesive and inside of a certain team where it's like that period is also considered an era. I feel like that is perfect in a solar punk setting. And then finally, I also wanted to say like closely related to this whole thing is like visually just the way that you approach releasing singles, music videos, tours, promotional tours, and then also like your concerts, um, and the different ways that can take space and shape. I feel like Janet, of course, because yeah, this whole conversation is about like yeah, also like of course Michael Jackson was like a big influence on all of it with everybody, but um, I say Janet because the cohesiveness and of the concept albums are more clear with her. I with Michael, it's not always been that case that it is like more of a collection of songs rather than a full thing. So don't kill me, but yeah, so, which is why I choose Janet as an example in this case. Um, I feel like what Janet also uh, gave us with that is that the music videos from an era are like thematically, but they are the same visually. They are also similar. You, you get the vibe of that total era, even in her performances, in her music videos, her look, playing with hair, playing with looks, playing with all of it. So and treating it like a full cohesive experience, including the album and part of the album and creation of the album. And all these different artists that I've named, that was the same case. And then also like um, the idea of how you approach that. Because like the music film, like Michael introduced that to the popular like culture outside of like musicals itself themselves. Um, uh, they build it up on that, and then when Beyonce came out with like especially like Beyonce album, and then Lemonade, and then now Black is King, the way that she approached that, um, and then the spin-offs from that with Dirty Computer from Janelle Monáe, just visually appealing things where you can exemplify also like a solar punk aesthetic, and just do that. So yeah, no, that was my initial take on music and solar punk. But my video's gonna be too long, so I'm gonna say goodbye, and I'll talk to you guys later.